It is with a heavy heart that I take up my pen to write these last words in which I shall ever record of the singular gifts by which my friend Mr. Sherlock Holmes was distinguished, whom I shall ever regard as the best and the wisest man whom I have ever known. Hello everybody, I'm Kate Cass, and welcome to another edition of Let's Talk About, and welcome to what is possibly the final installment of Sherlock and the Curious Critic. Over a year later, and after a dozen in-depth reviews, it's time to conclude this look at Sherlock with arguably its toughest and most divisive episode, The Final Problem. After Sherlock discovers the truth about his long-lost sister Eurus, the Baker Street Boys and Mycroft head to the facility she's been kept at to find answers. Instead, they are put through their toughest challenge yet, and Sherlock must use everything at his disposal to overcome it. I'm not sure how great of a rundown of the basic premise that was, but it was the best I could manage. This episode has a lot going on. I know I've said that a few times during this series, but trust me, those were nothing compared to this infamous season finale. Yeah, I also wasn't exaggerating when I said divisive. Ask around, it's either an exciting and captivating event of a finale, or a convoluted disaster where the show officially dug its grave. And my mission with this review is to figure out where I land on this scale, because I honestly don't know. I've had conflicting feelings about The Final Problem for a long time now, so I'm not here to set my sights on any particular praises and criticisms, but instead to examine this episode properly and see if it works for me or not. And we're going to start this discussion with the big old info dump about who Eurus is and what happened to her, as we see Sherlock and John getting answers from Mycroft by treating him like a client. I love how this has become their go-to response to dealing with difficult family issues. It contextualizes a difficult discussion into something removed yet personal. Sherlock wants answers, and he's going to get them on his terms. Because of some things I'm going to bring up later, I have to say that I appreciate they take the time to go over this before we went any further with the story. Eurus is a purely Sherlock creation, being inspired by something brought up in a non-official biography. So it's a reveal that comes with many questions, and it's good to see if they answer some questions they knew the viewers would have before we get distracted by the thrills. Especially stuff like the age gaps, or Mycroft explaining that he told their parents she had died. I feel like they put those in there just because they knew people were going to ask. Long story short, Eurus is the youngest of the Holmes children and the most intelligent, but she was also emotionally distant, for lack of a better phrase, being so logically observant that she's not able to distinguish feelings to a sociopathic degree. It leads to some, frankly, chilling descriptions from Mycroft concerning their childhood.
So I asked her if she felt pain, and she said,
"Which one's pain?"
That sister of yours.
Isn't she a dear? And so talented. Oh, but we're afraid she has a homicidal streak.
All of this led to destructive behavior, including an incident involving Redbeard, we'll get to that, and eventually her incarceration at Sharonford. Yeah, the show used the name of the Holmes brother in Gould's book as the name of an island asylum where Eurus was taken to, that she had somehow managed to escape to cause mischief over season 4. Remember the raft in Captain America Civil War? Sharonford is kind of like that, except scarier.
heaven may be a fantasy for the credulous and the afraid. But I can give you a map reference for hell.
On a side note, Mycroft gets some great dialogue in this episode. Anyway, the other big takeaway from this discussion is that Sherlock doesn't remember Eurus. Something that a lot of people, including myself, suspected after her reveal in The Lying Detective at the time. And apparently it's because he was traumatized by whatever she did to Redbeard, and that's why it's haunted him for the last several episodes, coupled with flashes of his forgotten memories that have happened at certain points during season 4. And I am very shocked that the fact that Sherlock's mind rewrote so much about his past to cope with what happened didn't create a huge crisis with Sherlock. Sure, as soon as he realizes what's happening, he demands answers and keeps pressing until he gets them, but this is a man who relies heavily on the faculties of his mind. The episode seems more focused on filling in the gaps Sherlock created, which is fine and all, but the fact that his own memories have been altered so severely without his knowledge, I feel should be a way bigger deal than it's treated as for someone whose whole identity revolves around the capacity of his mind, or maybe should have created some doubt in his own abilities during the events to come. I think it's the episode's biggest missed opportunity, but that's just me. Instead, they go for this thing where his connection and suppression of Eurus is tied to everything Sherlock is. His intelligence, his hesitation to form human connections, his generally closed-off, distant nature, all comes back to the trauma caused by Eurus. Don't know how I feel about that, really. I'm never quite sure how I feel when they try to give Sherlock Holmes a tragic backstory. There's nothing wrong with it, really. I just tend to think it's unnecessary. Actually, since I've tapped into the more critical well here, there's one recurring thing in this episode that I want to bring up real quick. Remember back in the Six Thatchers where I mentioned it had several moments that teeter on the edge of either being kinda cool or really ridiculous? Well, the final problem has a similar issue. There are a lot of moments and sequences in this episode that either border on this line or start off with a pretty cool or dramatic moment and then make it ridiculous and over the top in a way that doesn't feel quite right for this show. Like this moment where it's revealed that Mycroft's umbrella has a sword in the handle, which is pretty awesome, but then the handle itself turns into a gun. Okay, I know I've made a Kingsman joke before, but seriously, does Mycroft frequent that tailor shop? That's a bit much.
This ain't that kind of movie, bruv.
There are a couple other moments like that. Like, I still can't decide if Sherlock and John appearing on a boat in the middle of the ocean to hijack it is cool or really absurd, but I can't think of a scene that demonstrates his cognitive dissonance better than the grenade scene, where Eurus plants a grenade in 221B that'll go off if anyone moves. The build-up to finding the right time to move is pretty great and suspenseful as they all calmly yet tensely strategize, but it ultimately leads to this moment of Sherlock and John jumping out the window with Baker Street exploding behind them. This might quite possibly be the dumbest shot in Sherlock. I could forgive it if they had maybe a couple of burns or other injuries from it, but nope. Sherlock and John show up in the next scene perfectly fine and are later joined by Mycroft, who also escaped unscathed. It starts to feel like the script is trying to one-up itself all the time, making things bigger and cooler when most of the time it just feels absurd. Not to mention that it could take away from the stakes of the threats to come. If this didn't kill them, or at the very least injure them, then what will? And why should we be worried for them when they can make it out of that? Well, for me anyway, while stuff like that can take me out of the experience a bit, it didn't ruin the tension or stakes once the group gets to Sherringford, through a really cool double disguise deception. I know why they didn't do the disguise thing that often, but not only was it fun to see Mycroft, and by extension Mark Gatiss, get in on the act, but it always reminds me of how versatile an actor Benedict Cumberbatch is in the few times they do have Sherlock take on another persona. It's kind of a shame he's been so typecast, even if it's a type he's really good at. And those acting chops are put on full display yet again with the Silence of the Lambs style scenario where we meet Eurus properly and officially. There's not much analytical to say about their first meeting on my end, but it's still a really engaging scene. It's quiet and informative, but with the understated yet creepy setting, and with how well Cumberbatch and Cyan Brooks work together, it's just an all-around great proper introduction to this character. They even have a connection of sorts through violin playing that also gives us a good sense of their differences, with Sherlock finding the beauty in her playing and Eurus only knowing it as technically impressive. But she does notice something else when Sherlock starts playing.
Oh, have you had sex?
Viewers with a good ear might have noticed that was Irene's theme. Yes, I still stand by what I've said about the relationship, and unless that hypothetical season 5 has them shacked up in High Wycombe, you can pry that from my cold dead hands, but I always love music callbacks like that. It was pretty clever. Say what you want about Eurus existing, but Cyan Brooks' performance is exceptional, being downright haunting as Eurus and able to play 3 separate roles in previous episodes, something that, as far as I know, no one noticed. It's no wonder most of her background is in theater. She can transform into vastly different characters superbly. Despite all those appearances though, we didn't really get a sense of who Eurus was before. There was her 30 seconds in The Lying Detective and Mycroft's descriptions of her, but nothing quite compares to the real thing. Eurus is presented to be so highly intelligent that she's very intimidating and almost convincing. They bring up this idea that Eurus is able to reprogram people who spend too much time time around her. And while from a writing standpoint that sounds ridiculous, this is really where you see a good pair of script and performance. Watching Eurus's tapes of being evaluated by the governor at Sharonford is honestly chilling. If you pay attention to the dialogue, it's stuff that could be easy to dispute or debate, but that's the brilliant thing about it to me. Eurus is so sure and superior that it's almost hypnotizing, in a sense, challenging someone's own beliefs so confidently due to her superior intellect that it feels hard to dispute. I don't know how Sian Brooks approached playing a character who's supposed to be so distant from emotion that is scary, but however she did it, mission accomplished.
So many days not lived, so many words unsaid, etc., etc., etc.
Even Sherlock lets his guard down quite a bit around her. He's not really reprogrammed, but he ignores John's warnings and doesn't realize that the glass in the cell isn't there, leading this now iconic image from this episode and falling for Eurus's trap. A trap which includes the long-awaited return of Jim Moriarty. Kind of. Sort of. It's a flashback. I know this pissed some people off, but like I said before, I was not a fan of the idea that Moriarty was still alive, so this was more a moment of relief for me. Also, it includes quite possibly his best entrance in the series. Oh, Andrew Scott. Never change. Moriarty's inclusion in Eurus's plot sort of answers and raises questions at the same time, and that's mainly because, to me at least, the episode never really takes the time to elaborate on how the hints that led us to Eurus and Sharonford align with the story the episode wants to tell. I think what we're missing here is a big exposition dump. These are events that we've been building up to for years now, and the few explanations that justify that buildup go by so quickly to make room for the main story, you have to watch it 4 or 5 times to catch them all. And even then, there's a lot of unanswered questions. Why was the Miss Me message played all over London? Well, maybe because Eurus used it to keep Sherlock from being sent away, but that's just my assumption. It's certainly never explained. It's explained where that message came from. Moriarty apparently recorded a bunch of these for Eurus, but why was it played then? And kind of think of it, why did Moriarty even bother doing this? Sure, he'd want to mess with Sherlock, that was kind of his MO, but he was already putting a plan in motion to destroy him. Why align with this lady when the victory of destroying Sherlock Holmes can be all your own? It could have just been a contingency plan, since later Eurus says she's Moriarty's revenge that Sherlock's been waiting for, but again, the reason doesn't really align up with the hints that were teasing all of this. Neither does the reasoning behind Eurus disguising herself in the last couple episodes, which is never so much as mentioned during all this. Like, why did she bother doing that? For fun? The Faye Smith one I can see as Eurus wanting to meet her brother as a grown-up, but why did she pretend to be John's therapist or flirt with John on the bus? I couldn't tell you. Say what you want about the abominable bride, but at least they took a couple of minutes to go over and explain everything. And need I remind you that that incident was basically a dream. And it's not like this is a packed episode. You could have cut some stuff to make room for a classic breakdown of the events like cracking a mystery. Cut the scenes on the boat and the grenade. Go from Baker Street to Sharonford. You got a couple of minutes right there. Take some time to elaborate on the set of circumstances that got us here. Classic Sherlock Holmes includes spending 2 pages just explaining things after a reveal. I don't have much of a problem with Eurus conceptually, but I do think the foreshadowing to her introduction was weak at best. It's not a bad idea to have her in disguise throughout the season. In fact, it's great. The problem is that it doesn't contribute to her ultimate plan. It's just there to titillate the audience without adding substance to what this was all leading up to, which is a real shame. But what was all this leading to? Why did Eurus draw them here? Well, now the inmate is literally running the asylum, Eurus sets up a series of tests for the 3 of them to evaluate, challenge, and or maybe even try to understand their morals and actions. These tests lead to some really intense and dramatic moments actually, putting our heroes through some real moral and mental obstacles. I thought for a while that she was trying to change their minds, but her arguments are fairly baseless despite what she's trying to make them believe. Just because she doesn't understand the difference between right and wrong or innocent and guilty doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And watching the group try to rise to the challenge against Eurus's constant commentary and desire for detailed emotional responses is the main drive for the episode. And if you ask me, it really works. The setting and confrontations are intense and the cast are acting their asses off. There is some astounding work here with the group just trying to keep themselves together during a harrowing terrifying experience. Take the first challenge, where the governor begs John to kill him to save his wife, which he almost agrees to, even trying to be as assuring to this man as possible as he's about to take his life, but ultimately, he just can't do it. With Eurus saying John couldn't kill the governor because of a moral code where he didn't want blood on his hands, but he's a soldier. He's killed before, on the show. Really, he didn't want to kill a, for all intents and purposes, innocent man. Problem is, Eurus doesn't know the difference, and that's what makes the scenario so terrifying. How do you argue with someone who is so brilliant but doesn't know as much as they think? And how do you beat someone at a game when they're controlling the entire board? Although, another missed opportunity during that test is when Mary is brought up. As an experiment brought about by a psychopath trying to study normies for their emotional responses, this would have been the perfect opportunity to connect this to Eurus' involvement in the infidelity plot. Maybe with Eurus proposing that if John really loved Mary, why was he texting her? I know I said I don't like the infidelity, and I don't, but if it was meant to be foreshadowing for the finale, at least make it relevant. Actually, they could have connected that and the fact that she was John's therapist to this experiment she puts them through. So the fact that they ignore it is even more infuriating when it could have been perfect setup for this emotional evaluation. On an unrelated note, I don't think we dwell enough on the fact that John was flirting with Sherlock's sister. I mean, I know the fans did, it was a running joke for a while, but I'm stunned there isn't a moment of shock from John concerning that. One thing that is looked at fully and properly during these tests, though, is Sherlock's duality, so to speak, reminding us how Sherlock represses his emotions for the sake of a case, and does so in this case to get themselves out of this alive, and to save a little girl trapped on a plane that Eurus keeps putting them in touch with. We'll go more into that later. It truly tests Sherlock's capabilities to put his own emotional needs or desires aside to get work done. And this isn't for his own intellectual stimulation either. Going off of pre-fall Sherlock, you'd think he'd find this prospect of being challenged on such a high level enticing, but instead it feels like he's just trying to survive it by the edge of his teeth at points. Having to directly condemn a man he finds guilty, then having to shake it off when Eurus kills all the candidates because dwelling on it isn't going to get them out of here or back in touch with the girl, even being forced to hurt someone he cares about by making Molly say something deep and personal that despite having to say it himself, he knows he doesn't feel the same way she does.
I love you.
Sherlock doesn't find any of this neat, challenging, or intriguing. It's all horrible. And even with the bumpy start, I do think this whole situation does a really good job at highlighting that. Though there was some issue taken with the execution here, both figuratively and literally. A big criticism of this episode at the time was that it totally conflicts with the rest of the series. With the test and all the senseless murder, it felt more like a Saw movie. I will say that this is not the first time that Sherlock has added horror or thriller to its mystery genre, and I get upping the stakes to heighten the threat, but I do agree that it might have been a bit too much. Though I do have a soft spot for the haunted house style opening with Mycroft. It played on the cliffhanger of the last episode well, but the reveal that it was just Sherlock being overly dramatic to get his brother to tell the truth, yeah, that sounds about right. I'm willing to bet this isn't the first time this has happened either. But Eurus' actions being so heartless and ruthless, basically treating everyone in this facility, including her own family, like lab rats for her to experiment with, at least on first viewing when you're not expecting it, it gets a bit tough to watch. This was dark, and I could totally see that being a turnoff. And I say that as someone who really liked the lying detective. But the most revealing responses concerning this human experiment come from Mycroft. So, the Sixth Statue had some feature moments for Lestrade, the lying detective had Mrs. Hudson take a bigger role, now it's Mycroft's turn. I don't really know if this running theme was intentional by Moffat and Gatiss, by the way, it's just something I noticed when writing these reviews. Though Mycroft's focus moments may be the most eye-opening of them all. Keep in mind, Mycroft has known all this stuff about Eurus and Sherlock and kept it to himself for his entire adult life. Maybe longer. If you do the math, Mycroft might have been a teenager when Eurus was sent away, deciding to keep up the lies their Uncle Rudy told because he felt that was for the best. Hearing Mycroft explain all this at the beginning shines a lot of light on his character. His constant interference in Sherlock's life always came off as him just being an overbearing big brother, but since The Abominable Bride, where Mycroft was genuinely concerned about Sherlock's self-destructive drug use, it started to come off as more sincere. Mycroft kept looking out for Sherlock all their lives, but always at a distance, turning their sister into a story to scare his brother to monitor the condition of his trauma, and of course, his constant abuse of his power as a high-ranking government official to keep tabs on his renegade brother. He's certainly capable of genuine sincerity, but it's only in very small moments.
Your loss would break my heart.
Mycroft's always been a character who does business from the comfort of his office or room at the Diogenes Club. This incarnation is always the high-up man in charge, which comes in handy when they first start investigating what happened at Sharonford, with this awesome moment of Mycroft being dominating and authoritative. But what happens when one of the most powerful men in the world is suddenly in a position where he has no power? This game Eurus puts him through really gets to Mycroft, with many moments of him trying to take command back by refusing to participate in Eurus's trial, which doesn't wind up helping anyone.
This is inhuman, this is insane.
Mycroft, we know.
It especially doesn't help the governor when he adamantly refuses to kill him. And while it would be perfectly understandable for him to have hesitations, John had them too, it was that adamance to not have blood on his hands that made me realize something about Mycroft. That he's a powerful man who probably has to make large decisions that affect world government every day, but he always does it from the comfort of his own four walls. He may have had to make tough calls before, but he's never had to do it in the trenches, so to speak. So Mycroft's really out of his element here, to the point that when the governor winds up killing himself, he looks like he's going to be sick. And it's weird but fascinating to see Mycroft have trouble handling something when he's usually so in control. Mycroft's big issue is only lightly considering the human element. He approaches everything like a calculated problem to solve, and season 4 has shown that methodical approach has done more harm than good. Take for instance how Eurus got into contact with Moriarty in the first place. Thanks to Mycroft.
You have got to be kidding me!
Yeah. Before he died, Mycroft let Eurus have 5 minutes alone, unsupervised, with Jim Moriarty at Christmas. Again. This show has a real thing about Christmas that I never noticed before. Why would he do something that was clearly a very, very bad idea? Because Mycroft has been taking advantage of Eurus's intelligence for his own use in his work with the British government, and had to find ways to compensate her for her cooperation, weighing the options and likely believing that what he'd gained from Eurus's knowledge was worth whatever risk came with that. Spoilers, it wasn't. The final problem dwells a lot on the effect Eurus has had on Sherlock, but if any Holmes sibling was shaped into who they are through their relationship with Eurus, I think it's Mycroft. Using Eurus's capabilities for his own gain, looking after his only other sibling to an almost obsessive degree because of what they've been through, and never really forming any long, meaningful connections. I do believe that Mycroft has had the best of intentions, but by treating everything like a methodical puzzle to solve, and keeping himself distant from any personal risk, it all led to this. Which comes to a head with a test Eurus puts in front of Sherlock, to continue this messed up game with either John or Mycroft and killing the other. A scene where, at first, it feels like Mycroft is just trampling over John's contributions during this whole mess again, and insisting that he should be the one to go ahead. Okay, I get the idea that to get out of this alive, Sherlock would need Mycroft and his intelligence, but is the fact that John has a child going to come up at any point during this discussion? Well, it doesn't end up mattering, since it's just a front Mycroft is putting on to make the choice to kill him easier for Sherlock. And I really like this moment of selflessness from Mycroft. All throughout this, he's been playing the superior big brother, but here he faces everything at once, owning up to his mistakes, recognizing that he's not infallible, and staring down a dangerous, life-threatening situation with humility and dignity. Despite all of Mycroft's faults, including getting them into this mess to begin with, there's one constant with him. He loves his brother. Sherlock is the closest Mycroft has ever gotten to caring about another human being, and I think he knows that Sherlock Holmes is not going to be able to go on without John Watson. Mycroft's known for a while that John could look out for and help his brother in a way he's just not able to. A relationship with a strength that we're reminded of during the scene at Baker Street earlier.
This is a private matter.
John stays.
This is family.
That's why he stays.
The man who is willing to commit heinous acts to get his friends out alive, who pushed through these insane trials so they could help save a little girl, and who pulled his best friend back up time and again over the course of this in a way Mycroft never could, by reminding him to soldier on.
Today we have to be soldiers, Mycroft. Soldiers, and that means to hell with what happens to us.
Mycroft making the sacrifice is him somewhat redeeming himself for his mistakes by doing what he has been trying to do all these years. Look out for Sherlock's best interests. This is just him finally recognizing what that means. And while Sherlock isn't typically the kind of show to kill off characters, after what happened with Mary, I'm gonna be honest. I was not positive Mycroft was going to make it out of this. Luckily, no one dies quite yet, since Sherlock throws a wrench in Eurus' test. But before we go any further, let's have one last installment of a regular segment that you might have thought I had forgotten about. Yeah, sorry it took so long this time, but in case you haven't noticed, there's a lot going on in this episode, and it was tough to find a good break for the segment. Just a few book references again, but let's still take a minute to go over them. While the episode contains no homages to it, the title comes from the story The Final Problem, which is a story we've talked about before, since this is like the 4th time they've referenced that story in a major way. Eurus' name comes from the Greek god of the east wind, a clear reference to Holmes' final speech about an east wind coming in his last bow. During the flashbacks to Holmes' children in their youth, we see a younger Mycroft who was a bit chubby, which is kind of a cute way to call back to his book counterpart's body type. One of the tests Eurus gives the boys involves solving a murder connected to 3 brothers going by the name Garadeb, referencing the story The Three Garadebs. Eurus also mentions that Moriarty had a brother. That one I really like, since it's not something that gets brought up often in adaptation, but was mentioned in both The Final Problem and The Valley of Fear. During the montage in the epilogue, we see the symbols of the dancing men from The Dancing Men, and it's not a book thing, but I really like this one. The very last shot of the episode sees Sherlock and John racing out of a building with a plaque on it that says it's Rathbone Place. That was a really nice touch. But the most significant references come from the past. The Holmes family estate is called Musgrave Hall, from the story The Musgrave Ritual, complete with said ritual rewritten to fit a song Eurus wrote and keeps singing to Sherlock, which they keep calling a ritual. And there's one more callback that we'll uncover as Eurus brings Sherlock and John to the remains of Musgrave Hall, where we finally take a moment to breathe and get a grasp on the mystery behind Redbeard, what Eurus did, and what she wants. For it turns out, there was no Redbeard. At least not the way Sherlock remembers, for Redbeard wasn't a dog, but...
We never had a dog.
That's the big twist we were waiting for.
Now, before we address this, I want to say the execution of the reveal is pretty fantastic. Benjamin Caron's direction isn't as ambitious as other Sherlock directors, but it's been pretty great at heightening the material, and this is no exception. But about the twist. It's no secret that I've never been crazy about the Redbeard subplot. It's not a book thing, and its significance became more perplexing to me the more they kept bringing it up. So where does that leave where this all added up to? Well, I used to think it was really ridiculous. Now, let me preface this by saying that I understand that trauma is a very, very powerful thing, especially in someone as young as Sherlock was. But just how much Sherlock rewrote his memories to not only completely forget about his little sister, but changing his childhood best friend Victor into a dog, despite knowing his father was allergic, felt like it was taking my suspension of disbelief very much for granted. Particularly for a show like Sherlock, where we are dependent on grounded logic. Doctor Who? Sure, this could very easily happen for a number of reasons. It has a few times, recently even. But Sherlock? I wasn't sure. But this is one of those things that I buy a bit more with each viewing. By now, the initial shock and confusion has worn off. It's another piece of the canon now. And thinking about it, someone like Sherlock, who regularly maintains his mind for the sake of work importance and deletes insignificant things, I could see Sherlock's mind trying to protect itself in such a vulnerable state by evicting all the heartbreak and pain. With Sherlock being more sentimental than he's claimed all these years, I can see the path to using that ability to change something like that. Moffat and Gatiss could also be playing on the fact that the Sherlock Holmes of the original stories never really talked about the early years of his past, hypothesizing that there might be a dark, tragic reason as to why, which is, you know, fair enough. Still, there's a lot of blanks that I have trouble believing Sherlock never questioned until now. I feel like I would have bought this a lot better at the time if Sherlock either forgot Eurus or used his childhood nickname for Victor to make him a dog to make his loss less painful, but not both. Both seem like a stretch. And to be honest, it still kinda does. But I recognize that this could add up for a character like Sherlock, and after 4 years and 3 full rewatches in the last 18 months, I think what this all winds up contributing to Sherlock's journey as a character benefits more than it hurts. Though the larger connection to water because Victor was drowned definitely feels like a stretch, but whatever. However, I do kinda like how it connects to the Carl Powers case from back in the Great Game. Why was Sherlock so obsessed with this kid who had been drowned under mysterious circumstances? I can't imagine. Oh, and that last book reference. The name of Sherlock's best friend, Victor Trevor, is taken from a character in The Gloria Scott, who Holmes met at university and solved his first proper case with. So it's kind of cute that despite the far different circumstances, they had Victor essentially serve the same purpose. But with the truth now clear to him, Sherlock is able to pull himself together and save the day by solving Eurus's ritual to stop her. Somehow. Yeah, I don't really know what's changed here. Eurus says he couldn't solve the ritual until he had the proper emotional context. Which, one, seems weird coming from someone so far removed from emotion that she has to study it in the bloodiest ways imaginable, and two, I'm not really sure how realizing that Redbeard was a person instead of a dog makes the ultimate answer any clearer to Sherlock. It certainly adds more context in terms of justice, and maybe now that he knows the whole story, he's more motivated to find the answers and end this, but I have no idea. I'm also a bit confused about the nature and answer of the ritual itself. I do like the answer being connected to these strange gravestones around the hall and connecting the song to a cipher. That's pretty cool. But not only do they breeze by Sherlock solving this riddle very quickly, but the answer to it seems to only line up with what's going on now, pleading for Sherlock to save Eurus and where to find her. Now that works perfectly fine for what's going on now, but Eurus wrote this when she was a little kid. She said back then that in order to find Redbeard, he would have to solve the riddle. But how would the answer do that when it winds up being about her? Maybe if Sherlock had found the answer all those years ago and went to her room to play with her, she wouldn't have escalated things as far as she did, but once again, that's a guess on my end. I did mention this episode doesn't spend as much time going over the mystery as it really should, right? What's important now, though, is that it makes everything click at once for Sherlock. How to stop Eurus, how to save John, who is trapped at the bottom of a well about to be drowned like his original best friend, and how to save that little girl on the plane about to crash. Remember her? Well, you're really about to remember her because it turns out that little girl was, in fact...
I'm your brother.
Eurus in her mind palace.
What a twist!
This is the other reveal that made me shake my head at its absurdity for a really long time. Mostly because all this time, you could hear a little girl talking to them over the phone. So I couldn't understand how Eurus could have possibly faked that. But in one of my recent rewatches, I realized Eurus could do that voice when Sherlock discovers her alone.
Playing with me, Sherlock. We're playing the game.
So okay, that was an oversight on my end, so it's fine. When I noticed that and filled that little plot hole, it let me take a good look at the scene and what it was doing, and truly appreciate it. I think the path to us getting to this resolution here is rocky at best. I think I've made that clear at this point. But there is a real heart to this conclusion. Sherlock being able to save the day simply by reaching out to his sister is meaningful on several levels. On Eurus's end, it shows clearly and openly what she's truly been all this time. An outcast, lonely girl acting out because she doesn't know what else to do. Eurus may be brilliant, but she doesn't understand human connections. She was jealous that Sherlock had a friend who he spent more time with, so she killed him to get him out of the way. When that didn't work, she took things further. And because of that, it led to her acting out severely and being punished with lifelong isolation. So she never grew up, never connected with anyone. Which is why she's not only up in a plane in her mind palace, but she's still a little girl, feeling high above the world with people all around her, but no one she can communicate with.
You're high above us all, alone in the sky, and you understand everything except how to land.
Now, I feel I need to emphasize that this doesn't excuse anything she's done, which is why she goes straight back to Sharonford when this is all done, but it shows the dangers of high intelligence with a lack of compassion or empathy. Humors treated her family like lab rats at Sharonford because she was trying to see what she was missing. She's so distant intellectually and emotionally that no one tried to reach out to her. Something Sherlock couldn't have known as a kid, but he can try now, which is deeply significant for him as well, as it's a moment where he finally embraces the part of himself that's really always been there. I know Sherlock likes to proclaim himself as a
high-functioning sociopath.
High-functioning sociopath.
I'm a high-functioning sociopath.
But I don't think many people would disagree with me when I hypothesize that that little chestnut was self-diagnosed. And my reasoning for that is where we come back to this moment from the Great Game.
There are lives at stake, Sherlock. Actual human life. Just so I know, do you care about that at all?
I said way back then that this was one of the most important insights into Sherlock as a character. So what did I mean by that? Well, let's play it again.
Do you care about that at all?
Well, caring about them helps save them.
Nope.
Then I'll continue not to make that mistake.
And you find that easy, do you?
Yes, very.
See, this scene is supposed to denounce Sherlock as some kind of valiant hero, but note his word choice.
Well, caring about them helps save them. Save them. Save them.
Will caring about them help save them? Not, will caring about them help me solve the case, or will caring about them prove I'm clever? Will caring about them help save them? The phrasing is key here. Sherlock dismissed the idea that caring about the bombing victims would benefit in saving them, but he didn't lessen the importance of these people's lives or their safety. In fact, he calls the notion of caring for the victims a mistake, like not caring is a tactic to get the job done. He seems to put a human desire-like sentiment aside for the sake of efficiency, which will in turn save lives. And that's the big thing when it comes to our younger, modern detective. Sherlock as a series, especially in its first couple of seasons, spent a lot of time evaluating why Sherlock does what he does. The reaction from the people around him when he finds cases involving endangering other people thrilling was often derived as selfish, careless, and, well, psychopathic, which is likely where that high-functioning sociopath conclusion came from on Sherlock's end. And while he could have certainly worked on his reactions to these situations, which he did as the series went on, the truth is that Sherlock has always been a noble individual just by creating his own self-made profession. You can see that with all the other adversaries Sherlock has come across, most of which had two things in common. They were very clever, and they hurt many, many people. Moriarty was a dark reflection of Sherlock's profession, consulting in the ways of crime in search of challenge. Magnuson took advantage of the information he was able to gather to destroy others' lives. Culverton Smith built a philanthropic empire just to cover his actions as a serial killer. Even smaller villains like Jeff Hope and Vivian Norbury were brilliant people who used their invisibility to hurt others for their own gain. But Sherlock used his vast, finely tuned intellect to become a detective of all things. Someone who works in the service of others in times of desperation, a refuge to those who don't feel heard and need help more than ever. Sherlock may have chosen this work because it's satisfying to his ever-racing and demanding brain, but the end result is still the same. Sure, he puts caring aside during a case to the point that he comes off as insensitive, but when it matters, he does take the time to comfort, assure, and empathize. Going to release Sarah first during the Black Lotus kidnapping, rescuing Irene after everything she did, and staying in touch with her, talking Henry Knight down from killing himself, prioritizing saving a young boy's life over solving a puzzle in the Great Game, racing to rescue John from a bomb or a bonfire, assuring Mrs. Hudson after she's held at gunpoint, giving genuine sympathy to a family who lost their son in the Six Thatchers, convincing Major Sholto to let them save him, and everything he did for Mary. If all Sherlock cared about was whether he was right or not, why go to all this extra effort? None of these examples will help satisfy his own curiosities. It's just moments of him reaching out, even momentarily, to those in distress to hopefully save a life. But I think the most relevant example here is from just the last episode, where Sherlock is ready to dismiss a client because he's preoccupied, but instead leaves his flat for the first time in a week to lend support and guidance to someone desperate and potentially suicidal. The only payment for taking her case he accepts being the gun she was going to kill herself with, which he then throws in the river. Even in his darkest hour, Sherlock takes the time to help someone in need long before he realizes the ramifications connected connected to Culbertson Smith, going about it with more respect and kindness than you might expect all through the night and well into the morning. It's kinda sweet. This is even more meaningful than it was at first glance now that we know that was Eurus. Throughout all this, she's been wanting to see what kind of person Sherlock was. And looking at these examples, from Eurus to Moriarty and everything in between, Sherlock's life's purpose is more virtuous than originally perceived. Heck, the only wrench they managed to throw into Eurus's game earlier was when Sherlock refuses to kill his brother or best friend, but places the gun under his own head, ready to take his own life before he would ever take either of theirs, especially if it meant putting an end to what Eurus is doing, which really throws Eurus through a curve. I'd imagine self-sacrifice is something even more alien to her than any other complicated emotions, but it's again something Sherlock has practiced over and over and over again through these last dozen adventures. Eurus is even taken aback by what she sees in Sherlock during their little walk.
You know what I expected? You're nicer.
Than who?
Anyone.
High-functioning sociopath my ass. The center of Sherlock's character development all this time is not to let the work take over the man. Sherlock has always been sentimental, using his great intellectual powers for a greater good instead of for a self-involved, destructive goal like we've seen he very easily could have. But there were times where Sherlock could have gone down that path, or let his own curiosities destroy him. He's definitely somewhere in the middle when we first meet him, but his connections through family and friends, especially with John, who both accepted him unconditionally and set him straight when he was going too far, helped him take control of his faults and impulses, and went to greater lengths than he probably ever could have imagined for the sake of preserving that. Realizing the strength connections like that can make. From the first moment he was surprised with John being impressed by his deductions rather than annoyed, that made him want to keep this guy around, to appreciating the constant presence of people like Mrs. Hudson and Lestrade, the underappreciated friendship of someone like Molly, or the unexpected acceptance of someone like Mary. They've been the leading motivation of all of his actions since the Reichenbach fall. Sherlock's past encounters with people just as brilliant as him show what he could have become if he didn't care. Back at A Scandal in Belgravia, Mycroft pointed this out.
My brother has the brain of a scientist or a philosopher, yet he elects to be a detective.
And followed it with this question.
What might we deduce about his heart?
I don't know.
Neither do I.
What does Sherlock being a detective say about his heart? That he has one, despite what he or anyone around him thinks. All leading to this moment in the final problem where Sherlock tries to offer Eurus companionship, where he finally embraces both the genius and the hero. For most of adult life, Sherlock has been operating under the belief that human connections harm more than they help, because it can cloud one's judgment, and in the line of work he's created, it's not worth the risk. This is also possibly due to what happened with Victor, but that's not entirely clear. But over the course of the show, Sherlock has realized the importance of having other people in your life. Yes, it can be annoying, complicated, and even heartbreaking, but at the end of the day, it's worth it. It's always worth it over being alone, which is manifested in Eurus. So Sherlock decides that the only way to stop all this is to sympathize with her. Eurus is supposed to be the worst case scenario when it comes to being an intelligent yet isolated person. Here, Sherlock gives her the opportunity to connect. That if she's willing to reach out, he'll be there. She'll never have to be alone again.
No, I'm just an idiot. I'm on the ground. I can bring you home.
Does Eurus deserve that kind of outreach after everything she did? Probably not. Actually, scratch that, definitely not. But that's not really the point. Sherlock asked all those years ago if caring about the victim would save them, and in this case, it was the only thing that would. Our high-functioning sociopath finally accepts that being driven purely by cold reason isn't all he needs to be the best of himself. What he chooses to do here isn't good or bad, it's, well, it's...
It is what it is.
And what it is growth. Saving the day simply by reaching out to his sister is the apex of his character development. Opening up sincerely and unconditionally, fully embracing the sentimental side to save the life of his sister, his brother, his best friend, and even his own soul.
You're not lost anymore.
Too that, that's all bogged down by overly horrific actions, plot points that fizzled out when they were just getting momentum, and a set of events that seem more concerned with being cool or shocking than being tonally coherent. That's the thing I've been struggling with through this entire review. The story can be really messy at points for the sake of shocking spectacle, and I'm not even sure how much these plots and reveals the show's been building up to for the last 2 seasons were really worth it, but without these challenges and revelations, we might not have this amazing moment where everything comes full circle for Sherlock, where he matures and becomes his best self. I'm not sure how much I love the idea that everything Sherlock is supposedly tied to this one traumatic experience when he was a kid, that he then completely forgot about, but the fact that he faced those demons by acting on the things he's been suppressing all these years, combined with what we've seen of Sherlock's transformation on the show up to this point, is great stuff. So maybe it was all worth it. I still don't really know. I do think it leaves our heroes on a good note, and it's clear that that compassionate side of Sherlock is going to be a bit more front and center from now on, like by calling Lestrade by his proper first name for once.
Thanks, Greg.
Which would have been way more special if he hadn't already done that in The Six Thatchers.
Let's help you solve your little problem, Greg.
But oh well. Or when Sherlock's parents rightfully chew Mycroft out for keeping the fact their daughter was alive for all these years a secret, Sherlock actually defends him a bit. After all the grief he's given his brother throughout the series, it's another small sign of his character development and being willing to patch things up. Which is really nice, but is it weird I really like watching Mrs. Holmes scolding Mycroft? I love that woman. One of the sweetest moments for Sherlock, though, is when he keeps his promise to Eurus, visiting Sherringford regularly so she wouldn't be alone anymore. While it doesn't seem like she can be saved, so to speak, Sherlock can still reach out to her through something they can both connect with. A beautiful song. Looking back on it, I really should have given more praise to Michael Price and David Arnold's magnificent and iconic score for the show, but I guess I can make up for that a little bit here, since this last song is possibly my favorite in the series. It's beautiful, personal, and evolves into something truly triumphant. It's an amazing song to play the show out with, because really, these last few minutes do feel like a proper ending, which was weird at the time. This was the first Sherlock season finale with nothing resembling a cliffhanger. But as wishy-washy as I am about the events of the final problem, this little montage of an epilogue does make me smile. It ends where it really all began, with Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson running off to solve crimes and answering calls to mystery and intrigue from 221B Baker Street. After so much devastation and heartbreak over the course of season 4, it was nice to end it all on some healing, with one last message from Mary giving a very sweet send-off to her Baker Street boys that sums up this episode and the series pretty perfectly. That who you are isn't as important as who you can become. That it's difficult when things fall apart and life is changed in exponential ways, but if you can make it to the other side and work to rebuild, it might just be better and stronger than ever. But how strong this conclusion was really depends on who you ask. And if you ask me, overall, my relationship with the final problem is still complicated. I think that's what I've officially come to terms with now that I've broken most of it down. I used to not like this episode, and outside of some overarching elements, I still don't think I love it, but something interesting about it is that a bit more of its intent and aspects of its narrative become clearer with each viewing. It's an episode that's definitely a lot on your first watch, but this is my 5th or 6th time seeing it, and even while writing this review, parts of it started to click a bit better. That said, not everything clicked, obviously, and in fact, some of its faults became more prominent when I was putting all this together. But that leaves me at a stalemate that I can't quite break. Do the phenomenal performances, mood-inducing cinematography, and compelling character dissections leading to exceptional long-term developments outweigh the bad? Or does the sloppy or rushed mystery execution, weak or confusing payoffs, and missing opportunities for deeper character exploration overtake the good? After all this time, I still don't really know, but I'd say it's an episode that has replay value and warrants dissection like this, as I used to lean more towards the dislike side, but each time I slide a bit more to the like side. There are things I love and things that frustrate me, and attention to detail or development that I appreciate as a longtime fan, and things that make me feel like some of that investment was forgotten or wasted. When all is said and done, the final problem reminded me of of Holmes' sentiment in that famous passage in His Last Bow where Eurus got her name. There's an east wind coming all the same. It'll be cold and bitter, Watson, and a good many of us may wither before its blast. But a cleaner, better, stronger land will line the sunshine when the storm has cleared. This finale is a harrowing and frustrating journey, but at the end it feels triumphant. It's not insulting to me as a fan, and I don't want it stricken from the canon like some people. I do think it's an important part of the series in many regards that should be acknowledged, warts and all. If this were just another season finale, I think I'd be easier on it like I am on His Last Vow, but the fact that it's now the series finale, it makes me a bit more critical of it, and wish that certain things got to be included in Sherlock's proper Last Bow, like having the supporting cast get more than glorified cameos, or maybe include John in the climax for once. I get why Sherlock dealt with this threat alone again, but after how much he realized John was an essential part of his life and work, I think it would have been way more meaningful for both of them to see this final problem through to the end. In terms of it being an episode in its own right, for me, the good tends to outweigh the bad. It's an exciting, suspenseful adventure that misses the mark on some point, but excels enough in others to compensate for it. However, as a season and series finale, I think it could have been way better. If there's one thing I can say about it, it was definitely a daring note for the show to end on. And with that, we conclude Sherlock and the Curious Critic, folks. At the beginning of 2020, I made it my mission to review every episode of the BBC Sherlock over the course of its 10th anniversary year. And despite some delays and everything that happened in the world, I managed to complete it. If anything, it helped me remember what month it was during quarantine, so that's a plus. Real talk though, this was a tough year in many regards, something I didn't expect when I announced this project. So, as silly as it may sound, this retrospective might be the thing I'm most proud of accomplishing this year. This was something I wanted to do for years, and it's surreal to have it fully realized. Love it or hate it, Sherlock is a fascinating beast, an unusual yet oddly fitting concept with an exceptional cast, creative style, and reinterpretations of iconic tales. Something that took the world by storm, and while it stumbled a bit at the finish line in a way that certainly tarnished its reputation, I still admired the show tremendously, in both its ambition to try something different and high respect for what came before. I love it for that. I will always be grateful to Stephen Moffat, Mark Gatiss, Sue Virtue, Benedict Cumberbatch, Martin Freeman, and absolutely everybody else who made the show possible from beginning to end for letting me appreciate something that I love in a whole new way. There! I did it! 1 full year of Sherlock reviews officially done. I even presented myself with an award. Just out of curiosity, let me know if you've seen more than one review in this retrospective, or even all of them. I'd love to know if I held anyone's attention to the very end. If I did, thank you so much for seeing this journey through with me. It's been quite the case to work on. Before we hang up the bell staff and magnifier, there's one more thing I'd like to talk to you guys about, and that's the future. But I'm probably going to wait a while before I do that. I like to take a breath and focus on some other stuff. In the meantime though, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next time.